The diner on West 46th Street was not the kind of place that appeared in travel guides or lifestyle magazines. Its neon sign buzzed with a letter missing from the word comfort, so that it simply read Comort above the door. And the booths were patched with silver duct tape along the seams. On a Tuesday night in early October, the place smelled like burnt coffee, chicken grease, and something faintly sweet. From the pie rotating, in the glass case near the register, Isabella. Reyes had been on her feet for 9 hours when the door opened, and let in a cold slice of Manhattan air along, with a man who clearly did not belong there. He was tall, with dark hair slightly disheveled, as though he had run his hands through it several times. His coat was cashmere, and his shoes were the kind that cost more than a month of Isabella's rent. He stood at the entrance looking around the way people look around when they are deciding whether to stay or flee, and Isabella gave him approximately 4 seconds before she crossed the floor and pointed at a booth near the window. "Sit anywhere that isn't taken," she said. Not unkindly, but not warmly either, because she had 17 tables and 2 hours left in her shift, and she did not have the energy to perform charm she did not feel. He sat. She brought him water and a laminated menu with a coffee stain on the corner. "What happened to your car?" she asked, because men in cashmere coats did not walk into diners like this one unless something had gone sideways. He looked up at her. Something shifted in his expression, a kind of surprise that someone had read him that quickly. "Tire blew out on 8th Avenue, he said. "My driver is handling it." "Your driver," she repeated. "Is that funny?" "I didn't laugh," Isabella said, pulling out her notepad. "What can I get you?" His name was Ethan Calloway, though she did not know that yet. He ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie, and he ate both slowly, reading something on his phone, and when he paid, he left a tip that was larger than the bill. Isabella noticed but said nothing. And when he was gone, she folded the bills and tucked them into the pocket of her apron and thought nothing more about it. He came back. The next night, and the night after that. By the 3rd visit, she stopped handing him a menu, and by the 5th visit he had learned her name, and she had learned his, and by the end of the 2nd week, they had fallen into the kind of easy back and forth that feels like it has been happening for years, even when it has barely begun. He told her small things. She told him small things back. He told her he had grown up in group homes in Boston and had built his company from a single residential renovation. He had managed at 22 with borrowed tools and borrowed money. She told him she had come from San Antonio with 2 suitcases and a debt her father had left behind when he disappeared and never came back. What Isabella did not tell him was that the debt was largely for her brother Tommy's repeated stints in rehabilitation facilities. What Ethan did not tell her was that he had not slept through the night in 11 years. On the 15th night, he asked her if she would like to see his apartment. He asked it plainly, without the smooth performance of men who are accustomed to getting what they want, and it was the plainness of it that made her say yes. His penthouse on the Upper West Side occupied the entire top floor of a building that seemed to be made almost entirely of glass. The city spread out below them in every direction, glittering and enormous. And Isabella stood at the window for a long time without speaking. She had lived in New York for 3 years and had never seen it from up here. From above the noise and the exhaust and the daily grinding effort of being a person with very little in a city that prized having a great deal. "It's strange," she said finally. "What is? It looks peaceful from up here. It doesn't feel peaceful from down there." Ethan stood beside her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. And then he turned to look at her, and the look was not the look of a man calculating something. It was the look of a man who was simply present, which Isabella had not expected from him, and which undid something careful she had been keeping in place. What happened next was not careless. It was not impulsive in the way people sometimes mean that word, as though desire is a failure of good judgment. It was the opposite of careless. It was 6 hours of 2 people paying attention to each other with the kind of focus that most people reserve for things they are afraid of losing, 6 times through that long October night. And each time felt different from the last, each time carrying something the previous had unlocked, until the city below was beginning, to lighten at the edges, and Isabella lay with her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling more rested than she had in months. Even though she had not slept at all, she drifted off. Sometime after 4 in the morning, when she woke, the room was silver with early light. She stretched and sat up slowly, and she noticed it immediately, a small dark stain on the white sheets near her hip. Her cycle, which stress and double shifts had made unpredictable for months, had arrived 3 days early. It was not alarming. It was simply biology, inconvenient and ordinary. "Ethan," she said softly, turning to him. He was already awake. He was staring at the sheets. The change that came over him happened in the space of 2 seconds, and it was total. His face drained of color so completely that for a moment Isabella thought he was ill. His hands, which had been warm and steady all night, began to shake against the sheets. His breathing changed, coming in short, tight pulls as though the air had grown thick. He tried to sit up and could not. He tried again, and his legs simply did not respond, as though the signal from his brain was failing to reach them. And a sound came out of him that was not quite a word and not quite anything else. A low, broken sound that Isabella felt in her chest. "No," he was saying very quietly. "No, not again, Danny. Danny, I can't." Isabella did not panic. She had seen this before. Not exactly this, but something close enough that she understood what was happening in her body before her mind had finished processing it. She had held her mother through anxiety attacks after her father left. She had sat on cold linoleum floors with Tommy when the withdrawal made his whole body shake and his mind go somewhere unreachable. She moved slowly. She did not touch him immediately. She lowered herself to his level, and she spoke his name once, clearly, and then she waited. "Ethan, look at me. I need you to look at my face." His eyes were somewhere else entirely, fixed on something 11 years away. "Ethan, I am right here. You are in your apartment. It is early morning. My name is Isabella, and I am right here with you, and you are safe." The trembling in his hands intensified, and then very gradually. The way a fever breaks slowly rather than all at once, it began to ease. His breathing lengthened. His eyes, still wide, began to move toward her voice. "There you are," she said quietly. "There you are." He stared at her, and she could see the exact moment he came back. The way his focus sharpened, and then immediately, painfully, became awareness of where he was and what had just happened in front of her. Shame crossed his face like weather. "Isabella," he started, and his voice was wrecked. "Don't," she said gently. "You don't have to explain anything right now. I can't move my legs." "I know. It will pass. Just breathe." He looked at her like a man who had been expecting her to leave and could not understand why she was still there. Outside the window, the city was waking up, indifferent and enormous. And inside the penthouse, Isabella Reyes sat beside a billionaire who could not stand up from his own bed and held space for him the way she had learned to hold space for people she loved, with patience and without judgment and without asking for anything in return. She did not know yet that this moment would change. Everything she did not know yet that the story was just beginning. The morning stretched quietly around them as Ethan's breathing finally settled into something steady and even. Isabella had not moved from the floor beside the bed. She had not reached for her phone. She had not looked toward the door. She simply stayed. And that staying was the most powerful thing she could have done for a man who had spent his entire adult life watching people leave. After a while, feeling returned to his legs. He tested them slowly, pressing his feet flat against the mattress, and then swung them over the edge of the bed and sat upright. He did not look at her right away. He stared at his own hands instead, turning them over as though checking that they were still his. "This has happened before," he said. It was not a question. "I know," Isabella said. She stood and pulled the soft throw blanket from the chair near the window and draped it over his shoulders. "Without making a ceremony of it, you're not frightened." "I seen people I love fall apart," she said simply. "It doesn't frighten me. It makes me want to understand." Finally looked at her. His eyes were dark and exhausted, and something behind them was deciding whether to trust her, weighing it the way you weigh a risk that could cost you everything. Danny was 11. he said at last. I was 17. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed beside him, not too close, just close enough, and she listened. Ethan had been placed in his fourth foster home at 15, a house in a suburb of Boston run by a couple named the Hargroves, who were genuinely kind people. The first genuinely kind people he had encountered in the system. Danny was their biological son, 6 years younger than Ethan. A small, restless boy who followed Ethan everywhere with the uncritical devotion that only children who have not yet learned to calculate affection can offer. Ethan had loved him the way you love something you never expected to be given. The summer. Ethan was 17. He was supposed to watch Danny while the Hargroves went to a neighbor's barbecue 2 streets over. It was a hot August afternoon. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. Danny had gone out to the backyard pool alone. Ethan woke to silence. The particular silence of a hot afternoon that should not have been that quiet. He found Danny at the bottom of the shallow end. He pulled him out. He called the ambulance. He performed the CPR he had learned in a school health class, and he performed it correctly, and it did not matter because Danny had been in the water too long, and the damage was done in 3 days later in a hospital where the sheets were exactly that particular shade of white, with exactly that particular smell of antiseptic and grief. Danny Hargrove died. Ethan was adopted 6 months later by Patricia and Derek Calloway, wealthy Bostonians who had seen a promising young man in the foster system and decided that adopting him would look generous in certain social circles. Patricia had never once, in 21 years, asked him how he was doing and meant it. The blood, Isabella said softly when he stopped speaking. The sheets in the hospital, Ethan said. There was blood on Danny's head when I pulled him from the pool. He had hit the edge going in. And the sheets. He stopped. Any blood. Sometimes just white sheets in a certain kind of light. It takes me somewhere I can't get out of quickly. Post-traumatic stress, Isabella said. Have you ever spoken to anyone about it? I had a therapist for 2 years in my late 20s. It helped with the sleep. It didn't help with the episodes. Because you stopped, she said, not accusingly. He looked at her sideways. You're very direct for someone who just met me 15 days ago. I've been direct my whole life, Isabella said. It's the one luxury I've always been able to afford. Something moved across his face that was almost a smile. Then it faded and he looked at her with serious eyes. The blood this morning? It's yours. Your cycle. 3 days early, she said. Stress does that to me. I scared you. You surprised me, she corrected. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city had fully woken up. Delivery trucks and voices, and the sound of the world resuming its ordinary business below them, while up here to people, sat on the edge of something neither of them had planned. Why are you stressed? He asked. You don't have to tell me. Isabella looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about lying, or about offering the comfortable half-truth she usually gave people when they asked about her life. The version where she was simply a hard-working girl making her way in New York, which was true as far as it went, but he had just given her his worst thing. The least she could offer was her own. My brother Tommy is 23 years old, she said. He is funny and generous, and he can fix any engine you put in front of him. He is also addicted to opioids, and has been since he was 17, since my father left and the bottom dropped out of our family's life. She paused. He has been in rehabilitation 3 times. He is currently in a facility in New Jersey. The facility costs more than I make in 3 months of waitressing, and I have been covering it for the past 1.5 years with the help of my sister, Rosalind, who is putting herself through nursing school at the same time. Ethan said nothing. He listened the way she had listened to him. Without flinching, and without filling the space with reassurances that would have been easier for him than for her. My mother doesn't know the full extent of it, Isabella continued. She is back in San Antonio living on a small pension and her rosary beads, and I am not going to be the person who tells her that her son is the way he is. She has carried enough. Isabella lifted her chin slightly. So I carry it, by yourself. I have Rosalind. That's not the same as not being alone, Ethan said quietly. Isabella looked at him and felt something in her chest loosen in a way that was slightly frightening. The feeling of a knot you have been holding tightly for so long that you have forgotten your hand is closed. It is not the same. They ordered breakfast from the penthouse kitchen and ate it at the long kitchen island in comfortable silence. And somewhere in that silence, a decision settled between them without either of them announcing it. Isabella called the diner and arranged to cover her shifts from later in the week. Ethan called his office and cleared his afternoon. They spent the day together simply and without pretense, walking through Riverside Park while the October trees burned gold above them, buying coffee from a cart. Sitting on a bench watching the Hudson move slow and gray toward the sea, he took her to visit a building he was renovating in Harlem, a former textile factory he was converting into affordable artist housing, which surprised her. "I thought you built luxury hotels," she said. Looking up at the old brick facade, "I build what needs building," he said. "Luxury pays for this." She looked at him with new eyes and he pretended not to notice, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. That evening, back at the penthouse, he made a call she did not ask him to make. He called Dr. Jonathan Hale, his private physician, and then he made a second call to a trauma specialist named Dr. Whitmore, whose number Dr. Hale provided. And he scheduled an appointment for the following Monday. He did it calmly, without drama, as though it were simply a reasonable thing to do. And Isabella understood that he was doing it because of her, and that saying so would ruin it. So she said nothing, and simply poured them both a glass of red wine. They had 4 more weeks like that first one. Weeks of the diner and the penthouse, and long walks and honest conversations and the kind of closeness that arrives when two people who are both accustomed to keeping the gate locked find themselves standing on the same side of it for the first time. And then Patricia Calloway came home. From her annual trip to Europe, she arrived at the penthouse on a Thursday evening without calling ahead, which was her custom, as though the social grace of announcement applied to other people and not to her. She was 61 years old, and dressed as though 61 were something that happened to lesser women. Her hair was silver and set with perfect severity. Her jewelry was cold and beautiful, and it suited her. Isabella was in the kitchen making pasta when Patricia walked in. She heard the heels on the marble floor and came out wiping her hands on a dish towel, and the two women looked at each other across the living room. "You must be the waitress," Patricia said. Isabella folded the dish towel neatly and set it on the counter. "I must be," she said. "You must be Patricia." Something shifted in Patricia's expression, a small recalibration at not being immediately unsettled. "Where is my son?" "He'll be back in 20 minutes. He went to pick up wine. Would you like to sit down?" "I would like you to explain what you're doing in my son's home." "Cooking pasta," Isabella said. "It's almost ready if you'd like." Some? Ethan arrived to find his mother seated in the living room with the rigid posture of someone containing a great deal of pressure, and Isabella in the kitchen, finishing dinner with the calm efficiency of someone who had served difficult people for years and was not impressed by difficulty in expensive clothing. What followed over the next hour was not a scene. Patricia was too controlled for scenes. It was something quieter and more dangerous than a scene. A series of precise observations delivered in a pleasant voice, each one designed to reach through the surface and find the wound. She mentioned Isabella's background, her father's disappearance, the debt, Tommy's addiction. She had done her research thoroughly, and she delivered each fact with a soft, regretful expression, as though she were sharing bad news reluctantly rather than deploying it as a weapon. "I'm not angry with you, dear," Patricia said to Isabella when Ethan had gone to the kitchen for a moment. "I simply know my son. He rescues things. It is a compulsion born from guilt. He rescued that Harlem building. He funds shelters and programs, and he chose you the same way because you look like something that needed saving." Isabella looked at her steadily. "That's an interesting theory." "It's an observation," Patricia said. "And you are a smart girl, clearly. Smart enough to know the difference between being loved and being a project." Ethan returned and caught enough of his mother's expression to understand what had been said in his absence. The old obedience rose in him, the long habit of managing Patricia's displeasure, of smoothing things over to maintain peace that was never really peace, but simply the absence of open warfare. Isabella watched it happen. She watched him start to fold. She stood up. "Patricia," she said, and her voice was even and clear, "I understand that you love your son in whatever way you are capable of loving someone, but I will not sit here and be managed." She turned to Ethan, and her eyes were soft, even though her voice was firm. "You do not have to choose between your mother and me tonight, but I need you to know that I am not a project and I am not a rescue. I am a woman who has worked for everything she has and who has loved you without wanting a single thing from your bank account, and I need you to decide whether you believe that." She picked up her jacket and she left. She walked 12 blocks in the October cold before she heard him running behind her. Isabella stopped, but did not turn. "She is wrong," he said, breathless, reaching her. "You are not a project. You are the first real thing in my life in 11 years. "Then prove it," Isabella said. "Not to me, to yourself." He looked at her in the cold streetlight. She could see him wanting to be brave enough and not quite being there yet, and she understood. Because she had lived her whole life in the gap between wanting to be brave enough and actually being it. "I need some time," he said. "I know," she said. And she walked away, because sometimes love means giving someone the room to become who they need to be, even when the walking away costs you everything. She went home to her apartment in Queens. She sat on her small couch, and she called Rosalind. And she did not cry until after she had hung up. 3 months passed. In San Antonio. October became November, and November became a cold, dry December that felt nothing like the New York winters Isabella had grown accustomed to. The sky here was wide and pale, and the streets smelled like tamales and diesel and her mother's soap. And Isabella told herself every morning when she woke up in her childhood bedroom that coming home had been the right decision. She told herself this with a particular conviction of someone who was not entirely convinced. She had returned to help Gloria manage the house while Tommy completed his final stretch at the New Jersey facility, and because the rent on her Queens apartment had finally outpaced what she could cover on diner wages, with Tommy's fees also coming out of the same thin budget, Rosalind had found a second part-time position at a hospital in Newark and had insisted Isabella stop splitting costs with her, which Isabella had refused for 2 weeks before accepting. Because accepting help was its own kind of courage. She was still learning. She found work quickly in San Antonio, at a respected restaurant on the Riverwalk called Hacienda Blanca, where the head chef recognized her training within the first hour of her trial shift and offered her the sous chef position by the end of the week. It was good work. The kitchen was warm, and the team was skilled, and the food they made together was the kind of food that made people at the table reach across and touch each other's hands. She did not check Ethan's name online. She made this a rule, and she kept it for 6 weeks before breaking it one quiet Sunday morning. While her mother was at Mass, she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and typed his name into a search engine and looked at the results for approximately 4 minutes and then closed the browser and washed her cup and did not do it again. What she had seen in those 4 minutes was a photograph of Ethan at a charity gala in Boston, dated 3 weeks after she left. He was wearing a dark suit. He was standing next to Patricia. His expression was the expression of a man performing the life expected of him. And Isabella had recognized it immediately because she had seen its absence on his face during the weeks they were together, when he had been, for the first time in years, simply himself. She put him away in the part of herself where she stored things she could not fix. Tommy came home in December, thin and careful, and holding himself with the tentative steadiness of someone who has just learned to walk again and is not yet certain the ground will hold. Gloria wept when she saw him. Isabella stood in the doorway of the house, where they had all grown up, and watched her mother hold her brother, and she felt a fullness in her chest that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the particular relief of a long wait finally being set down. "You look good," Tommy told Isabella that first evening sitting at the kitchen table while Gloria made hot chocolate the way she had made it since they were children, with real Mexican chocolate and a cinnamon stick. "You too," Isabella said. "You look sad," he said. "I look tired. You look both," Tommy said with the bluntness of someone whose recovery had stripped away the energy required for comfortable social lies. "Who is he?" Isabella wrapped her hands around her cup. "Nobody you need to worry about," Bella, Tommy said, and the use of her childhood name from him was so unexpected, and so gentle that she had to look out the window for a moment before she could look back. "You paid for 3 rounds of the most expensive treatment facility in New Jersey. You worked double shifts for a year and a half. You moved back here to help Mama, and you did all of it without asking a single person for anything." He paused. "You are allowed to have something that is yours." She did not answer him, but she thought about what he said for a long time after he went to bed. In New York, Ethan Calloway was doing what Isabella had asked him to do, which was proving something to himself. It was not a clean or comfortable process. Dr. Whitmore, the trauma specialist, was a quiet, methodical man who had the unsettling habit of sitting in complete silence after Ethan said something significant, holding the silence the way you hold a cup you want to drain every last drop from. Ethan had found the first 4 sessions nearly unbearable. By the 6th session, he had cried for the first time in 21 years. And by the 8th session, he had said Danny's name out loud without his legs giving out beneath him. He had also, quietly and without announcement, begun to dismantle certain structures in his life. He reduced Patricia's access to his calendar, his offices, and his decisions. He did it gradually rather than dramatically, because he had spent enough time with Dr. Whitmore to understand that burning everything down in a single gesture was still a way of avoiding the slower and more difficult work of building something better in its place. Patricia noticed and said nothing for several weeks, which was itself a sign that she understood something had shifted. When she finally confronted him in his office on a gray January afternoon, she arrived as she always arrived, without calling ahead, and she found him at his desk with the sleeves of his shirt rolled up and a cup of coffee and none of the defensive stiffness he used to assemble whenever he knew she was coming. "You've been different," she said, taking the chair across from him. "Yes," he said. "The therapist, among other things." Patricia folded her hands in her lap. She was a woman who communicated almost entirely in implication and subtext, and plain, direct responses unsettled her in a way that most confrontations did not. "I want you to understand," she began, "that everything I have done has been because I believed it was in your best interest." "I know you believe that," Ethan said. "I also know it isn't true." She blinked. "You adopted me because it suited a particular image you wanted to project," he said, and his voice was not angry, which was perhaps the most unsettling part for her. It was simply clear. That is not love, Patricia. And most of what you have called protecting me over the years has been protecting your idea of what my life should look like. Isabella was not a threat to our family. She was the best thing that had happened to me in more than a decade, and you used her brother's addiction as a weapon because you could find nothing else, and that is something I will not forget. Patricia's composure held, which was impressive and also, Ethan thought, deeply sad. "So what now?" she asked. "Now you are my adoptive mother," he said. "I will treat you with respect and basic kindness because that is who I want to be. But you will not have authority over my personal life, and you will not use investigators to research the people I care about. Those are not negotiations." She left without another word. Ethan sat at his desk for a long time after she was gone, feeling the unfamiliar sensation of a space where something heavy had been removed. It did not feel like victory. It felt like the first quiet morning after a very long storm. He called Rosalind Reyes that afternoon. He had found her number through a contact at the New Jersey hospital where she worked part-time. And he knew calling her was a risk, that she might hang up, that she might tell Isabella, that he might have already made things worse simply by trying. Rosalind did not hang up. She listened to what he said, which was not a great deal. Mostly that he wanted to know that Isabella was all right, and that he understood if she had no interest in speaking to him. and that he was not calling to ask Rosalind to intercede. "She is all right," Rosalind said. "She is working. She is taking care of our mother and our brother, and she is pretending to be fine." "Is she fine?" Pause. "She is Isabella," Rosalind said, which answered the question precisely. "I need to see her," he said. "Not to ask anything of her. Just to be honest with her in person, because she deserves that." Another pause, longer this time. "She's in San Antonio," Rosalind said. "She's at Hacienda Blanca most evenings, finishing the dinner service around 10. If you were going to do something, Ethan, do it right. Come as yourself, not the billionaire. Just yourself." He booked a flight for the following Saturday. He did not take his driver. He did not book a suite at the best hotel in the city. He took a cab from the airport to a modest hotel 3 blocks from the Riverwalk, and he walked to Hacienda Blanca in the January evening, wearing dark jeans and a wool coat and carrying nothing except what he actually was. He arrived at 9:30 and asked for a table near the kitchen pass, where the servers moved quickly and the noise was highest, and no one would pay attention to a single man eating alone. He ordered simply and ate slowly, and at 10 minutes past 10, the kitchen door swung open, and Isabella walked out in her chef's whites with her dark hair pulled back and a smudge of something red on her collar that was almost certainly tomato and absolutely certainly not blood. And Ethan sat with that knowledge in his body, the knowledge that he could see it and name it and stay seated. And he understood that this too was part of what had changed. She saw him when she was halfway across the room, heading for the bar to speak to the floor manager. She stopped completely. He stood up. They looked at each other across the warm, noisy restaurant for a long moment that contained everything that had passed between them and everything that had not yet been said. And then Isabella walked toward him with the measured pace of someone who is choosing each step deliberately. "You came to San Antonio," she said. "You left New York," he said. "I had reasons, I know. They were good reasons." He held her gaze. "I had things to do. I should have done them before I asked anything of you, and I didn't, and I'm sorry for that." Isabella studied him. She had a remarkable ability to look at people and see past the surface of what they were presenting. It was one of the things that made her extraordinary in a kitchen and in a life. And what she saw now was not the controlled, careful man she had first met in the diner on West 46th Street. What she saw was someone who had gone through something real and come out the other side still standing. "Patricia," she said. "Handled," he said. "Not dramatically. Just clearly, Danny. Still working on it," he said. "Dr. Whitmore says the working on it is the point, not the finishing." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Around them, the restaurant moved and hummed with the ordinary, beautiful business of people eating and talking and being alive. "Tommy came home in December," she said. "I know. Rosalind told me." "I'm glad you spoke to Rosalind." "I needed to know you were all right." "I was all right," she said. Then, more quietly, "I was not entirely all right." We took a breath. "I am not here to ask you to come back to New York. I'm not here to offer you anything or fix anything. I came because you told me to prove something to myself, and I needed you to see that I did it. Not because I want credit for it." He paused. "Because it mattered to me that you know I heard you." Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the Riverwalk was lit with strings of light reflected in the dark water, and the January air was cool and dry, and somewhere down the street a mariachi was playing something slow and sweet. "Sit down," she said finally. "I'll get someone to bring you dessert. We make a very good tres leches." She disappeared into the kitchen, and when she came back she had taken off her chef's whites and was wearing a simple dark top underneath, and she sat across from him, and they talked the way they had talked in the diner on West 46th Street, directly and honestly, and without performing anything for each other. They talked until the restaurant closed around them, and the staff began stacking chairs, and the floor manager gave Isabella a knowing look that she pretended not to notice when they finally stepped outside into the January night. The Riverwalk was quiet, and the reflections of the lights moved gently on the water, and Isabella stood beside him in the cold and thought about all the things she had carried alone for so long, and all the things he had carried alone for so long, and the strange particular arithmetic of two people's loneliness that does not add up to more loneliness, but to something else entirely, when they choose each other honestly. Not moving back to New York right away, she said. Tommy needs time, and my mother needs me here, and I have work I care about. No, he said, and I am not going to be managed or investigated, or introduced as something decorative at events, where your mother controls the table. I know that, too. And if there's another episode, she said, turning to look at him, you call Dr. Whitmore first and me second, because your healing is yours and I am not your treatment. No, he said quietly. You told me that the first morning. I just wasn't ready to hear it. She nodded slowly. Then she reached out and took his hand, not dramatically. Not as a conclusion, but as a beginning. The way you pick up a thread you have set down carefully, rather than losing it entirely. Rosalind says, you're building affordable housing in Harlem, she said. The project opens in April. She also says there's a commercial kitchen space on the ground floor that doesn't have a tenant yet. He looked at her sideways. It doesn't. I've been thinking about a community cooking program, Isabella said, teaching traditional Mexican and Latin American cuisine. Affordable classes. The kind of thing my grandmother would have loved. That sounds like something worth building, he said. It does, she agreed. They walked along the river in the quiet January night. Two people who had shown each other their worst and most fragile and most stubborn things and had not looked away. And the city of San Antonio moved around them in its ordinary and extraordinary way, full of people carrying their own weights and their own histories and their own carefully tended hopes. And above them, the sky was enormous and clear and full of the kind of stars you can only see properly when you are far from the noise and the glare of the life you have been running, Isabella. Reyes did not choose Ethan Calloway because he was a billionaire. She chose him on a January night on a quiet river walk, because he had done the hard work of becoming someone worth choosing, and because she had done the same, and because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places, in diners with duct tape booths and missing letters on the sign, with two people who are tired and honest and brave enough to stay. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like. Share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.